Imagine your world is just tearing itself apart. All the old rules are gone, and what's left is conflict, division, and a whole lot of fear. So in the middle of all that chaos, how do you hold on to who you are? How do you live a life that actually means something? Well, it turns out a writer from the 17th century faced that exact same reality, and he left behind a roadmap that might just be more relevant now than ever before.
We're talking about the English Civil War. And listen, this wasn't just some political squabble over who gets to be in charge. No, this was a crisis that sliced right down to the soul of the nation. It turned neighbor against neighbor, shattering communities. It was a time of just deep, unsettling spiritual and social chaos.
And this brings up a massive question, one that feels just as real today as it did almost 400 years ago. When everything around you feels unstable, maybe even hostile, where do you even begin to find the strength, the structure, to live with some integrity and purpose?
Our guide through all this turmoil is a man named Jeremy Taylor. Now, Taylor wasn't some academic sitting in a cozy, safe office. As the chaplain to King Charles I, he was right in the thick of it, and he was on what turned out to be the losing side. His loyalty cost him big time. We're talking hardship, even prison. He wasn't just writing about chaos, he was living and breathing it every single day.
And honestly, that's what makes him so incredible. Taylor wasn't just a cleric, he was a master of the written word, a literary powerhouse. And his greatest works? They weren't dreamed up in some peaceful study. They were forged in the fire of a national crisis, a direct answer to the world that was crumbling around him.
So, how did he respond to all this? Well, his first big move was intensely practical. He didn't offer up some fuzzy philosophy. No, he wrote a literal, hands-on guide for how to conduct yourself, a user's manual for navigating a broken world one day at a time.
He published two masterpieces, one right after the other, Holy Living and Holy Dying. Now, you can't think of them as separate books. They're two halves of a whole. One is the guide to building a good life day by day. The other is the guide to facing the end of that life with faith and a clear head. Together, they create a complete roadmap for a person's entire spiritual journey.
And this is where you really see how practical he was. Holy living isn't about vague ideas. It's a clear, actionable game plan. He was basically saying, look, the world outside is a mess, so bring some order to your inner world. Control your desires, let go of your ego, be a force for good. This wasn't just feel-good advice. It was a daily workout routine for the soul.
So, after laying out the framework for how to live, Taylor turned to the one thing no one can avoid. He focused on what was, for so many people at that time, a constant, terrifying reality: death.
But here's the twist. Taylor didn't see this as being morbid or depressing. For him, thinking about mortality wasn't about dwelling on fear. It was about gaining focus. It was a tool, really, to strip away all the trivial, distracting junk in life and find this profound clarity about what actually matters.
And you absolutely have to remember the context here. During the Civil War, death was everywhere. This wasn't some theoretical exercise for them. Holy Dying was speaking directly to an audience that was facing the fragility of life every single day. And it offered them a way to face it, not with despair, but with dignity and faith.
But Taylor's vision was bigger than just personal self-help. He also had a radical idea for how to heal the fractured society that was ripping itself apart. He went straight for the source of the conflict: religious intolerance.
Okay, so to really get his argument, we gotta understand a key term from the title of his book, The Liberty of Prophesying. Now, when we hear prophesying, we think of predicting the future, right? But in the 17th century, it meant interpreting scripture and preaching about it. And the whole debate over who had the right to do that and whose interpretation was the correct one was literally what people were fighting and dying over.
So Taylor's argument for tolerance was revolutionary. And it's brilliant in its simplicity. It's basically three logical steps. First, he says, let's start with a dose of humility. Let's all just admit that we're human, our understanding is imperfect, we could be wrong. Step 2 flows right from that. If we could be wrong, then we should be really, really careful about condemning other people for their beliefs. And that leads to his powerful conclusion. Let's focus on the things that actually unite us, like kindness and common sense, instead of letting arguments over dogma tear us all apart.
And I mean, you can't overstate how huge this was. This one book laid the intellectual groundwork for centuries of arguments about religious freedom. In an age of absolute certainty, where people were being persecuted for their beliefs, Taylor's call for a little humility and moderation, while it wasn't just a good idea, it was a radical act of peacemaking.
So,
When you put it all together, what's the lasting legacy of this writer who was forged in war? A quick look at his career shows how these big ideas didn't just define his life, they went on to shape the world long after he was gone.
Just look at the timing here. All of his most important works came out right in the middle of the crisis. The Plea for Tolerance in 47, the Guides to Living and Dying in the early 1650s. Yeah, sure, after the monarchy came back, he got his reward and was made a bishop, but his real legacy had already been sealed back in those years of turmoil.
And you just can't talk about Taylor's legacy without talking about his style. It wasn't just what he said, it was the incredible way he said it. His writing is just beautiful. It's elegant, it's full of poetic images, and it carries this deep moral seriousness. He managed to combine these profound ideas with absolutely breathtaking language, which is why he's still seen as a true master. And that brings us right back to where we started. Taylor wrote for a nation at war with itself, and he offered tools for both personal integrity and for social peace. Which leaves us all with one final thought. In our own turbulent and, let's be honest, often divided times, what can we learn from his call for humility, for reason, and for charity?